500 princesses bowed for a crown. But the vampire king was watching the girl who cleaned the floor beneath them. The grand ballroom of Blackthorn Palace glittered like a fallen constellation, crystal chandeliers blazing overhead, marble floors polished so perfectly they reflected every jewel and silk gown in the room. And along the curved staircase stood 500 royal daughters from every vampire house in the Eastern Territories, dressed in gold, silver, and deep crimson, each one flawless, poised, and waiting for history to tilt in her favor. At the far end of the hall, near the shadow of a column carved with ancient runes, Evelyn Carter knelt with a linen cloth in her hand, scrubbing a faint stain no one else would ever notice. Her simple black uniform a stark contrast to the ocean of glittering gowns, her brown hair pinned back in a modest twist, her head lowered the way staff were trained to keep it. She had been awake since 5 that morning, hauling buckets, polishing railings, memorizing the rhythm of invisibility, because invisibility was safety, and safety meant keeping her job, and keeping her job meant paying the rent on her small apartment 12 miles from the palace gates. A hush rolled through the ballroom like a silent wave as the doors at the top of the staircase opened, and King Lucian Vale stepped forward. He wore black, not decorative black, but a deep, light-absorbing shade that made the gold embroidery at his cuffs look like starlight caught in midnight. He appeared no older than 30, yet every noble in the room straightened, as if something ancient had just shifted in the air. His skin was pale, almost luminous under the chandelier light, his features sharp and composed, his presence controlled and absolute. 500 princesses lifted their chins in unison. 500 hopeful smiles bloomed. But his gaze did not linger on silk or diamonds. It drifted lower, past the front row of royal contenders, past the polished marble, to the girl on her knees with a cloth in her hand. Evelyn felt it before she dared to confirm it. A change in temperature, a subtle tightening in the air, like the pressure before a summer storm. She told herself not to look up. Staff did not look at the king unless spoken to. Staff were background. Staff were replaceable. Laughter suddenly broke from the center of the ballroom, bright and rehearsed. One of the princesses, tall and radiant in a gold gown, had accidentally tipped her wine glass, letting a ribbon of dark red spill across the marble near Evelyn's hands. Gasps fluttered theatrically. "Oh dear," the princess murmured sweetly, stepping back, careful not to stain her own hem. Evelyn didn't hesitate. She pressed the linen to the floor, blotting carefully, steady hands, steady breath. Don't shake. Don't react. Don't exist. She could feel eyes on her now, some amused, some indifferent. And then another sensation layered over the rest. Silence. Not the polite hush of ceremony, but something deeper. He was moving. The king descended the staircase with measured steps, each one deliberate, the sound of his polished shoes echoing across marble like a quiet command. He stopped just feet from where Evelyn knelt. The princess in gold beamed up at him, her voice soft and practiced. "Your Majesty, I hope the evening pleases you." He did not answer her. Instead, he let something fall from his gloved hand. A ring, heavy, ancient, set with a dark stone that seemed to hold its own gravity. It landed inches from Evelyn's cloth. The room froze. 500 breaths paused. Evelyn looked at the ring, then at the polished shoes in front of her. Slowly, carefully, she picked it up with both hands and rose just enough to extend it toward him without meeting his eyes. "You dropped this, sir," she said quietly, her voice steady, respectful, unafraid. Their fingers brushed. For a fraction of a second, warmth surged beneath his pale skin, not visible to most, but unmistakable to him. And in that vast, glittering ballroom filled with royalty, ambition, and centuries of tradition, the vampire king felt something he had not felt in over 100 years. Recognition. The warmth did not fade when their fingers separated. It spread, subtle but undeniable, traveling beneath King Lucian Vale's skin like a pulse that did not belong to him alone. His hand closed around the ring, yet his eyes remained fixed on Evelyn Carter as if she were the only solid thing in a room suddenly unsteady. Around them, whispers began to rise, delicate at first, then sharper. 500 princesses shifted in silk and satin, their jeweled crowns catching the light like restless sparks. The princess in gold forced a brittle smile. "Your Majesty," she said again, softer this time. Shall we proceed with the selection? Lucian did not look at her. He studied the maid instead, taking in the plain black fabric of her uniform, the faint crease at her sleeve where soap and water had worn the cloth thin, the steady rise and fall of her breathing. She was not trembling. She was not dazzled. She was simply waiting, as though returning a fallen ring to a king were no more remarkable than polishing a staircase. "What is your name?" he asked at last, his voice even, controlled, carrying effortlessly through the ballroom. Evelyn swallowed once before answering. "Evelyn Carter, Your Majesty." Her tone was respectful, not reverent. Honest, not rehearsed. A murmur rippled through the nobles. Staff were not addressed by name. Staff did not exist in conversations that shaped dynasties. Lucian's gaze sharpened slightly. "Look at me, Evelyn Carter." The command was quiet, but it was absolute. For a heartbeat, she hesitated, trained instinct urging her to keep her eyes lowered. Then she lifted her chin. Their gazes met fully for the first time. His eyes were a deep ember red beneath the chandeliers, ancient and measuring. Hers were clear gray, steady as winter skies. Something in the air shifted again. Not dramatic, not visible, but felt. The princesses sensed it. The council members along the balcony sensed it. A tension that did not belong to competition. It belonged to recognition. "You handled a royal artifact without hesitation," Lucian observed. "You did not attempt to keep it." Evelyn blinked once, confused. "It is not mine to keep." The simplicity of her answer struck harder than flattery ever could. A faint tightening appeared at the corner of Lucian's jaw. Not anger, not displeasure, but something dangerously close to approval. On the upper balcony, a council elder leaned forward, his voice smooth but edged. "Your Majesty, the ceremony must continue. The royal houses have waited 100 years for this night." Lucian did not break eye contact with Evelyn. "Then let them continue waiting." A collective intake of breath swept the ballroom. 500 princesses straightened, disbelief flickering across carefully composed faces. Lucian stepped closer to Evelyn, close enough that she could feel the coolness of his presence without fear. "Tell me," he said quietly, though every word carried. "If you were offered a crown, would you take it?" The question hung between them like a suspended star. Evelyn did not glance at the princesses. She did not look at the throne. She answered the man in front of her. "I would ask why it was offered." Silence followed. Then, unexpectedly, the faintest hint of a smile touched the vampire king's expression, subtle and nearly imperceptible, but real. And in that glittering hall filled with ambition and centuries of expectation, the competition that had defined the night began to unravel, not with spectacle, but with a single quiet answer. The faint smile did not last long. It vanished as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by the composed stillness of a ruler who understood the weight of every gaze in the room. On the balcony above, the council elders exchanged tense glances. The princess in gold took a single step forward, her jeweled slippers gliding over marble. "Your Majesty," she said carefully, "surely a servant's curiosity does not outweigh the alliances of 500 royal houses." Her words were smooth, but the challenge beneath them was unmistakable. Lucian finally shifted his attention from Evelyn to the gathered court. The temperature in the ballroom seemed to drop several degrees. "Alliances built on ambition fracture easily," he replied, his tone calm, measured. "I am not seeking ambition." A ripple of unease traveled through the nobles. Evelyn stood very still, aware that every eye had turned toward her again. She wished she could disappear back into the shadow of the column, back into the comfort of anonymity. Instead, she found herself standing in the center of a silence that felt heavier than any spotlight. "Evelyn Carter," Lucian said, his voice softer now, though it carried effortlessly. "Step forward." The request was not harsh, yet it held the weight of command. She obeyed, taking 2 careful steps onto the polished marble, leaving behind the faint dampness where she had cleaned. The chandeliers cast light across her face, revealing the natural flush in her cheeks, the quiet strength in her posture. She folded her hands in front of her, not in submission, but in composure. "You asked why a crown would be offered," Lucian continued. "You did not assume it was a gift. You questioned its purpose." Evelyn met his gaze again, aware that speaking too boldly could cost her everything. "Anything powerful has consequences, Your Majesty. I would want to understand them." A sharp inhale. echoed from somewhere among the princesses. No one spoke to the vampire king of consequences. No one implied that power carried cost. Yet Lucian's expression did not darken. If anything, it sharpened with interest. On the balcony, one of the elders stepped forward, his silver hair gleaming under the lights. Your Majesty, this line of questioning is inappropriate. The human does not comprehend our traditions. She cannot. Lucian's eyes flicked upward briefly. You are certain? The elder hesitated. In that fraction of a second, the balance of the room shifted again. Evelyn felt it, the invisible current running beneath centuries of custom. She understood suddenly that this was no longer about a ball, or a crown, or even 500 princesses. It was a test, not of beauty, not of lineage, of character. Lucian descended the final step from the staircase until he stood on the same level as Evelyn, not above her, not distant. Equal in height on the marble floor. Gasps fluttered through the ballroom like startled birds. A king did not lower himself. He remained elevated, untouchable. Yet here he stood, only inches away. If I were to choose a queen tonight, he said quietly, the words directed to Evelyn but heard by all, she would need to understand that this throne is not a prize. It is a burden measured in centuries. It demands clarity, loyalty, courage. His gaze held hers, searching not for awe, but for fear. He found neither. Would you still ask why? He finished. The room seemed to lean inward. 500 futures balanced on her answer. Evelyn felt her heartbeat steady rather than race. Yes, she said simply. Because if I am meant to stand beside someone carrying centuries, I would need to know what I am helping him carry. Silence followed. Deep, unbroken. And for the first time in 100 years, the outcome of the royal selection no longer belonged to the highest born in the room, but to the quiet strength of a maid who refused to be dazzled by a crown. The silence did not break with applause. It broke with disapproval. A low murmur swelled along the balcony where the council stood, velvet sleeves brushing against ancient stone as elders leaned toward one another, their expressions sharpened by calculation. 500 princesses watched with smiles that no longer reached their eyes. The princess in gold straightened her spine and lifted her chin, reclaiming the center of the ballroom with deliberate grace. Your Majesty, she said, her voice carrying clear as crystal. A queen must unite kingdoms, not question them. The statement drew nods from several royal houses. Unity, tradition, continuity, words that had preserved power for centuries. Lucian did not respond immediately. He studied Evelyn as though the rest of the hall had faded into background noise. The chandeliers cast fractured light across her face, and for a fleeting moment he saw not a maid, but something steady, unmoved by spectacle. Unity without understanding becomes obedience, he said at last, his tone calm but resonant. And obedience is not loyalty. A ripple of tension ran through the crowd. One of the council elders descended halfway down the balcony staircase, his long coat flowing behind him. Your Majesty, he pressed carefully. This deviation threatens the legitimacy of the selection. The royal houses will not accept humiliation. The word hung heavy in the air. Humiliation. As if the presence of a human servant alone were an insult. Evelyn felt heat rise in her chest, but she kept her expression composed. She understood her position. She understood the risk. Yet she also understood something else. They were not angry because she had spoken out of turn. They were angry because she had not been intimidated. Lucian's gaze shifted to the elder. Legitimacy, he repeated softly. Does legitimacy come from numbers? His eyes moved briefly toward the 500 princesses arranged in perfect symmetry. Or from strength. The elder faltered. Strength had always been defined by lineage, by alliances, by wealth measured in estates that stretched for miles. But strength of character was not easily catalogued. Lucian turned back to Evelyn. If the court opposes you, he said quietly, though the entire ballroom heard him, would you bend? The question was not romantic. It was not gentle. It was a ruler's test. Evelyn felt the weight of 500 gazes press against her shoulders like a physical force. Bend, and the night would return to normal. Refuse, and she might lose everything. She inhaled slowly. If I am wrong, she answered carefully, I would learn. If I am right, I would stand. The simplicity of her words struck the marble floor harder than any declaration of love could have. A visible shift passed through Lucian's posture, subtle yet undeniable. Approval. Not because she defied the court, but because she did not dramatize defiance. She treated it as responsibility. On the far side of the hall, a crystal glass slipped from someone's hand and shattered against the marble. The sound cracked through the tension like a warning. No one moved to clean it. No one looked away. Lucian stepped forward once more, closing the final inches between himself and Evelyn. He did not touch her. He did not claim her. He simply stood beside her, shoulder aligned with shoulder, both facing the court. The symbolism was unmistakable. The selection had not ended with a proclamation. It had shifted with a choice. And for the first time in a century, the throne no longer looked toward the highest crown in the room, but toward the quiet courage standing at its side. The alignment was deliberate. King Lucian Vale did not raise his voice, did not declare a decision, yet the message resonated louder than any proclamation. He stood beside Evelyn Carter as though the space at his right had always been reserved for her. The council elder halted halfway down the staircase, refuse and retreat to safety, return to polishing railings and fading into shadows, where she could step into the center of a storm that had been brewing long before she arrived. If a trial is required, she said steadily, then let it reveal truth, not performance. A flicker of surprise crossed more than one royal face. Performance was the foundation of the evening. Every smile, every gown, every calculated glance had been rehearsed for months. Lucian's expression sharpened with quiet approval. Very well, he announced, his voice carrying across marble and crystal. There will be a trial. The ballroom stirred, anticipation rising like static before lightning. Not of lineage, he continued. Not of wealth. Not of appearance. His eyes swept across the assembled houses. A trial of judgment. The words landed heavily. Judgment could not be borrowed. It could not be inherited. It could only be demonstrated. The council elder descended the remaining steps, tension evident in the rigid set of his shoulders. And how shall this judgment be tested? He asked. Lucian's gaze returned to Evelyn, thoughtful, assessing. Tomorrow at sunrise, he said, a matter of governance will be presented before the court. A dispute between two allied territories that has remained unresolved for years. Each candidate will offer a solution. A murmur of alarm rippled through the princesses. They had prepared for dances, for recitations of heritage, for displays of charm. Not for policy, not for leadership. Evelyn felt a quiet steadiness settle inside her. She had never governed a kingdom, but she had negotiated late rent payments, had resolved conflicts between co-workers, had learned that fairness often required listening more than speaking. Lucian stepped back half an inch, creating the slightest space between them, yet remaining unmistakably aligned. At sunrise, he repeated, his tone final. The chandeliers seemed dimmer now, the glamour of the ball fading beneath the gravity of what lay ahead. And as whispers rose once more, it became clear that the competition had transformed into something far more dangerous than rivalry. It had become a question of who truly understood the weight of a crown. The announcement did not end the night, but it ended the illusion of it. Music that had once floated lightly through the ballroom now felt hollow, forced by musicians who sensed the shift but dared not stop playing. One by one, royal attendants guided the princesses toward adjoining corridors, their jeweled expressions carefully controlled, though whispers trailed behind them like smoke. Trials of charm they could win. Trials of judgment were another matter entirely. Evelyn remained where she stood, the marble cool beneath her shoes, the weight of what awaited at sunrise settling slowly into her chest. Governance. Disputes. Centuries of tension between territories she had only heard about in passing rumors among kitchen staff. She had never set foot beyond the palace gates in a carriage, never signed a decree, never commanded anyone. And yet she did understand something about conflict. She understood what it meant when two neighbors argued over noise because neither felt heard. She understood that most problems hardened when pride spoke louder than reason. Lucian watched the court disperse with a gaze that revealed nothing, yet beneath the calm surface his thoughts moved swiftly. The council would not remain passive. A human offering counsel before ancient houses would be seen as a threat, not because of her power, but because of what her perspective represented. Change. He turned toward Evelyn at last. You may retire for the evening, he said evenly. A chamber will be prepared. The words were formal, but the intention behind them carried something else. Protection. Evelyn hesitated. Your Majesty, she began carefully. I have duties to complete. A faint glimmer of something almost like amusement flickered in his eyes. Tonight, your only duty is to rest. He signaled quietly to a palace attendant, who stepped forward with a respectful bow. As Evelyn was guided toward a side corridor, she felt hundreds of years of tradition pressing against her back like a closing door. She did not look behind her. She did not search the room for approval. She walked steadily, shoulders straight, mind already turning toward the dawn. The corridor beyond the ballroom was dimmer, lined with tall windows that revealed the night stretching over manicured gardens and distant forest. The air felt cooler here, less charged by spectacle. Evelyn released a slow breath she had not realized she had been holding. Tomorrow she would stand before nobles who had ruled territories the size of entire states, whose estates spanned miles of ancient land. What could she possibly offer that they did not already possess? Clarity, she reminded herself. Not superiority, not grandeur, simply clarity. Back in the ballroom, Lucian remained alone for a moment after the last of the guests had withdrawn. The chandeliers cast long shadows across the now quiet marble. He flexed his hand unconsciously, recalling the warmth that had surged when their fingers touched. It had not been coincidence. It had not been performance. It had been something older than politics. And yet sunrise would not test destiny. It would test judgment. He lifted his gaze toward the eastern windows where the faintest hint of approaching dawn threatened the horizon. By the time the first light crossed the palace walls, the court would expect him to choose between tradition and truth. For the first time in a century, he did not fear rebellion. He feared misjudgment. And somewhere down the corridor, in a chamber prepared far beyond her usual world, a maid who had never sought a crown prepared to face a kingdom that had never expected her. Sunrise did not arrive gently. It cut across the horizon in a thin blade of pale gold, sliding through the tall eastern windows of Blackthorn Palace and spilling across polished stone floors that had witnessed centuries of silent power shifts. The ballroom had been transformed overnight. The glitter of the selection had vanished. In its place stood a long obsidian table set at the center of the hall, chairs arranged in a semicircle facing a raised platform where King Lucian Vale now stood, composed and unreadable. The council occupied the front seats, their expressions sharpened by expectation. Behind them, the princesses gathered once more, no longer adorned for admiration but dressed in muted elegance, prepared for scrutiny. Evelyn Carter stood at the far end of the chamber, wearing a simple dark blue gown provided by the palace, modest and unembellished. It fit her frame without grandeur, without distraction. She had not slept much. The chamber assigned to her had been larger than her entire apartment, the bed softer than anything she had known, yet rest had come only in fragments. She had spent the hours before dawn walking slowly across the marble floor, whispering questions to herself. What causes disputes to endure? What pride refuses to yield? What fairness truly demands? A council elder rose first, unrolling a parchment across the obsidian table. The territories of Ravenmoor and Eldergate, he announced, his voice echoing against the vaulted ceiling, have contested the rights to the Silverwood Passage for 73 years. Both claim ancestral authority. Trade has slowed. Alliances have weakened. No resolution has held. A murmur of recognition passed through the nobles. Silverwood Passage was not a small path through a forest. It was a corridor of commerce, stretching nearly 200 miles between coastal trade routes and inland estates. Control of it meant wealth, influence, leverage. Each candidate, the elder continued, will present her judgment. One by one, the princesses stepped forward. Their voices were polished, their proposals precise. Some argued for strict enforcement of ancestral claims. Others suggested rotational control measured in decades. One proposed increased taxation to discourage use entirely. The solutions were strategic, calculated, designed to favor one house without openly declaring it. Lucian listened without interruption, his posture still as carved stone. When the final princess returned to her seat, silence settled once more. The elder turned toward Evelyn. You may speak. Hundreds of eyes shifted toward her. She felt the weight of history pressing against her ribs, yet her heartbeat remained steady. She stepped forward into the open space before the table. If both territories claim ancestral authority, she began calmly. Then neither will ever willingly surrender it. A few brows lifted. She continued, her voice clear though not raised. For 73 years the passage has been treated as a prize. What if it were treated as shared responsibility instead? The council exchanged guarded glances. Divide oversight, not ownership, she said. Create a joint council made of equal representatives from Ravenmoor and Eldergate. Shared revenue, shared maintenance, shared accountability. If one fails to uphold its duties, the other gains temporary oversight until balance is restored. A faint stir moved through the chamber. Not dramatic, not explosive, but thoughtful. You would force cooperation, the elder observed. I would remove the reward for rivalry, Evelyn answered. If neither side profits from conflict, the conflict loses value. The simplicity of the logic hung in the air like a quiet bell. Lucian's gaze sharpened, not with surprise, but with recognition. The princesses had offered dominance. She had offered equilibrium. The council did not applaud. They did not smile. But for the first time that morning, no one interrupted. And as sunlight climbed higher across the marble floor, the trial began to feel less like a test of tradition and more like a measure of who truly understood the cost of power. The stillness after her answer did not feel fragile. It felt heavy, deliberate, as though the entire chamber were recalibrating around a new axis. Sunlight climbed higher along the obsidian table, illuminating the faces of the council one by one. No one dismissed her proposal. No one laughed. Instead, the elder who had first presented the dispute leaned back slowly, fingers steepled beneath his chin. Shared governance requires trust, he said at last. Trust has been absent for decades. Evelyn did not retreat from his scrutiny. Trust is not created by victory, she replied evenly. It is created by dependence. If both territories rely on each other for stability, they will protect that stability. A faint shift passed through several nobles. The concept was simple, yet disruptive. For generations, strength had meant superiority. She was suggesting strength through balance. Lucian remained motionless on the raised platform, yet something in his gaze had changed. The sharp assessment of a ruler testing a candidate had softened into something more focused. Recognition. Not of romance. Not of spectacle. Of alignment. One of the princesses rose abruptly from her seat, her composure cracking for the first time. Your Majesty, this is naive, she declared. Rival houses do not cooperate because they are asked politely. Murmurs of agreement flickered behind her. Evelyn turned slightly toward the speaker. Then do not ask politely, she said. Bind them legally. Structure the agreement so that breaking it costs more than honoring it. The princess faltered. Evelyn continued, her voice steady, thoughtful rather than confrontational. Power does not have to dominate to be respected. It has to be consistent. Silence followed. The words did not sparkle. They did not dazzle. They landed solidly, like stones placed carefully in a foundation. The elder's gaze shifted to Lucian. Your Majesty, he said slowly. The proposal is unconventional, yet it addresses the root of the dispute rather than its symptoms. Lucian descended the platform with measured steps, the sound echoing across marble. He did not look at the princesses. He did not consult the council. He stopped directly in front of Evelyn. For a moment, the hall held its breath again. You were not raised among estates that stretch for miles, he said quietly. You were not trained in royal academies. It was not an accusation. It was a statement of fact. Evelyn met his eyes without hesitation. No, Your Majesty. His gaze searched her face, as though confirming something only he could see. Yet you understood that a 73-year conflict is not sustained by land, but by pride. The faintest nod passed through the council. Pride. The word none of them had spoken aloud. Lucian turned to face the assembly. For 100 years, this court has equated worth with lineage. Tonight, and now at sunrise, it has been reminded that judgment is not inherited. The declaration resonated through the vaulted ceiling. Not thunderous. Not explosive. Final. The princesses sat rigid, their ambitions colliding with an outcome they had not prepared for. The elder inclined his head slightly. Then the trial is concluded? He asked. Lucian's eyes returned to Evelyn once more, the ember glow within them steady and unguarded. The trial is concluded, he affirmed. And in that sunlit chamber, beneath chandeliers that had once witnessed only tradition, a new definition of strength took its place beside the throne. The words settled into the chamber like a seal pressed into wax. The trial is concluded. No applause followed. No celebration. Only the sound of measured breathing and the faint rustle of fabric as 500 futures quietly adjusted to a new reality. Sunlight now flooded the eastern windows, illuminating dust motes suspended in the air, turning the once glittering ballroom into something almost austere. Lucian did not immediately ascend the platform again. He remained on the same level as Evelyn Carter, his presence steady, his expression composed, yet no longer distant. The council elder rose slowly from his seat, the movement deliberate, ceremonial. "Then it falls to your majesty," he said carefully, "to declare your decision." The weight of centuries pressed into that sentence. This was the moment tradition demanded clarity. Lucian turned, not toward the princesses, not toward the council, but toward the open space of the hall itself, as if addressing the stone walls that had witnessed 100 coronations. "For 100 years," he began, his voice resonant and controlled, "this court has prepared daughters of noble houses to stand beside the throne. They have been trained in diplomacy, in history, in decorum." His gaze shifted slowly back to Evelyn. And yet the one who understood the burden of that throne did not arrive seeking it. A tremor of restrained disbelief moved through the seated princesses. The princess in gold lowered her eyes, pride and realization warring behind carefully controlled features. Lucian extended his hand toward Evelyn, not forcefully, not possessively, but openly. "Evelyn Carter," he said clearly, allowing every syllable to carry to the furthest marble column. "You did not seek influence. You sought understanding. You did not pursue a crown. You questioned its cost." He paused, the silence amplifying the gravity of what came next. "Stand beside me." The request was simple. The implication was not. Evelyn felt the world narrow to the space between them. She had never imagined this path. She had never measured her life in terms of courts or councils. Yet she understood something now that she had not understood the night before. This was not about elevation. It was about responsibility. She stepped forward, placing her hand in his. His skin was cool, steady, grounding rather than overwhelming. Together they turned to face the court. Lucian's voice did not rise, yet it filled the chamber. "Let it be known that strength is not inherited through blood alone. It is proven through judgment. From this day forward, the throne will be guided not by tradition alone, but by wisdom wherever it is found." The elder inclined his head first. One by one, the council followed. The princesses remained seated for a moment longer, then slowly, deliberately, they rose as well. Not in celebration. In acknowledgement. The sunlight now bathed the entire hall, erasing the shadows left by chandeliers and candlelight. The spectacle of the ball had dissolved. What remained was something quieter, stronger. As Evelyn stood beside Lucian, she did not feel transformed into royalty. She felt anchored by purpose. And in a palace that had once measured worth by lineage alone, a new measure had taken root. Even the coldest crowns, she realized, are steadied not by jewels, but by the hands willing to carry their weight.